What this homeless man's dog did shocked the world. People barely noticed him anymore. A veteran broken by war, Daniel had grown used to the way eyes slid past him on the street. Only Harper, his German shepherd, truly saw him. Only Harper reminded him he was still worth protecting. But one night, Harper refused to stay still. He lunged, barked, and forced the world to turn its head. That single act, that refusal to look away, uncovered more than just danger. It revealed a bond so powerful it would melt hearts, divide communities, and ignite a movement for both forgotten soldiers and abandoned dogs. This is a story you'll never forget. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through Chicago's streets like a knife, carrying with it the sting of December. Snow clung to the corners of alleys, melting into dirty slush beneath boots that hurried past. People pulled scarves tighter, their heads bent low, their eyes fixed anywhere but on the man moving slowly down the sidewalk, with a limp in his step and a dog at his side. Daniel Reyes had grown used to being unseen. It was easier, he told himself, to slip into the background, another shadow among the brick and neon. His coat was threadbare, his gloves mismatched, and his boots scuffed nearly through at the soles. His beard had grown wild, flecked with gray, but there was still something in the way he carried himself. A straightness in his back, a quiet, steady bearing that marked him as different from the other lost men who haunted the streets. At his heel padded Harper, a German shepherd with a once proud gait, his muzzle dusted with white. The dog's ears were pricked, alert even in the numb cold, eyes scanning each doorway, each passerby, as though the years had not dulled the training etched deep into his bones. When Daniel paused, Harper sat without being told, tail sweeping the snow in slow arcs, a soldier still obeying orders. "Crazy old fool," someone muttered as they passed, shaking their head. Another voice followed, louder, meant to sting. "Look at him, wasting his life on a mutt." Daniel didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, and he'd learned that dignity was not in how others named you, but in how you held yourself when no one was watching. He reached down, his gloved hand brushing Harper's ear. The dog leaned into the touch, steady, silent, unshaken by ridicule. It hadn't always been like this. There were nights, when the wind howled and sleep wouldn't come, that Daniel's mind drifted back to another life. The uniform fit sharp and clean then, the badge catching the light like a promise. Harper had been younger, his coat darker, his eyes brighter. Together, they had run through the streets, not as outcasts, but as guardians. Daniel remembered the pulse of adrenaline, Harper leaping barriers in a blur of muscle and focus, the satisfaction of justice served. He remembered the cheers of children who once tugged their parents' hands to point at the police dog, the nods of respect from shopkeepers who waved him into their stores with coffee on cold nights. Those memories rose like warm breath in cold air, only to vanish quickly, leaving him staring at the fractured reality of now. He was a soldier without a war, an officer without a precinct, a man without a home. Still, he kept walking. The streets hummed with life that did not belong to him anymore. Office workers rushing for trains, students with backpacks heavy against their shoulders, laughter spilling from a cafe where the windows glowed amber. Daniel's reflection in the glass startled him sometimes. A stranger's face, hollowed by time and loss. He looked at Harper instead. The dog didn't see failure, didn't see disgrace. In Harper's eyes, Daniel was still the man he had once been, the one who gave commands with certainty, who knelt to praise him after a job well done. That silent faith was what kept Daniel moving, step by weary step, through another day that didn't promise much. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then heavier, dusting Harper's back until he looked frosted. Daniel pulled his coat tighter, though the chill had already sunk into his bones. He thought of the warmth of barracks long ago, of the sharp bark of orders, of Harper bounding ahead with the fierce joy of purpose. Purpose was what he missed most. The city didn't need him anymore. The world didn't seem to. Yet Harper still looked to him, trusted him to lead, and that was enough to keep the fire alive in his chest. A group of teenagers lingered near the corner, their laughter harsh against the quiet snow. One pointed as Daniel passed. "Hey, soldier, lost your war, huh?" The others laughed. Harper bristled, his growl low, but Daniel touched his collar. "Easy, partner," he murmured. His voice was calm, carrying none of the bitterness that could have risen. He had learned that words spent in anger were wasted, and besides, Harper needed him steady, always steady. They turned down an alley, away from the jeers. Daniel's limp grew heavier with the cold, but Harper slowed his pace to match, patient, loyal as ever. At the alley's end, the glow of a neon sign flickered, the entrance to a shelter. The line already wound down the block, men and women clutching blankets, their faces etched with exhaustion. Daniel hesitated. He knew the rule. Dogs weren't welcome. But Harper looked up at him, tail swishing once, and Daniel didn't even consider the thought of stepping inside without him. He'd made that mistake once, years ago, when someone told him Harper would be fine for a night. The sound of Harper whining in the dark, chained outside, still haunted him. Never again. And so instead of joining the line, he turned away. Harper followed, his trust unshaken, as if the cold streets were not punishment, but simply the terrain of their shared mission. Daniel found a patch of concrete under a bridge, shielded from the wind. He lowered himself slowly, every joint protesting, and Harper curled against him, sharing what warmth he could. Above them, traffic roared. Around them, the city pulsed. But in that small corner of the world, man and dog leaned into each other, soldiers in exile, yet still together. Snow drifted down, covering their shoulders like a quiet blessing. Daniel closed his eyes, Harper's steady breathing against his chest. Ridicule, cold, hunger. These were the battles of the present. Dignity was holding his partner close and refusing to abandon him, no matter the cost. And as the night deepened, the forgotten soldier and his dog disappeared into the hush of falling snow, unseen by most, but not broken. The barrel fire burned weakly, its flames licking at scraps of wood scavenged from broken pallets. It was the kind of fire that gave more illusion of warmth than heat, but on a night like this, even illusion was something. Daniel crouched beside it, his hands spread toward the wavering glow, fingers stiff in the bitter air. Harper lay close, his head resting on Daniel's boot, eyes half closed, but ears twitching at every passing sound. From his bag, a worn rucksack with one strap fraying, Daniel pulled out the evening's meager haul, 2 half-stale rolls from a bakery trash bin, a small packet of cold fries, and a strip of jerky he had bartered from another man earlier in the day. He placed the rolls on his lap and tore them in half, setting a piece on the ground in front of Harper. "Here you go, partner," Daniel said softly. His voice was hoarse, the kind of voice shaped by years of shouting commands and now worn thin by cold nights. Harper lifted his head, nose twitching, but he didn't move until Daniel gave the word. The dog's eyes fixed on him, waiting. "Okay," Daniel murmured. Only then did Harper lower his head and take the bread gently between his teeth. chewing slowly, as though mindful of the gift. It was a ritual they had shared for years, a quiet dance of patience and trust. Even now, when both hunger and cold pressed hard, Harper waited for Daniel's permission. Daniel smiled faintly. "Still got it, old boy. Still got it." The light from the fire revealed more than Daniel liked to admit. Harper's muzzle, once rich black, was streaked with gray that shimmered like frost. His body moved more stiffly these days, his rises and sits marked by a moment's hesitation. Yet the obedience, the discipline, the spark of loyalty in those brown eyes, none of that had faded. If anything, it had deepened, like roots that burrowed further with time. Daniel tore the jerky in half and slipped the larger piece to Harper. The dog crunched it down quickly, tail thumping once against the frozen ground. Behind them, footsteps clicked across the pavement. A group of men walked by, their coats thick, their voices loud. One of them glanced at Daniel and snorted. "Look at that," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "A man wasting his life on a mutt." The others laughed. "Could have bought himself a blanket if he didn't have to feed the dog." Their words hung in the air, barbed and sharp. Daniel didn't look up. He focused instead on Harper, who had lifted his head, ears pricked, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Easy," Daniel whispered, resting a hand on Harper's neck. The growl subsided, though Harper's gaze followed the men until they disappeared down the block. Daniel sighed, staring into the fire. He could have answered. He could have shouted back that this dog had saved lives, that Harper had once been honored in ceremonies, while those same men sat at home watching television. He could have explained that Harper was all he had left, the one piece of his life that hadn't abandoned him when everything else fell apart. But explanations were wasted on people who had already decided not to see. He leaned closer to Harper. "They don't know you like I do." The dog nudged his hand, warm nose pressing against his palm. Daniel rubbed the spot between Harper's ears, the same way he used to after a long shift years ago, when Harper had led him to suspects hiding in alleys, when together they had chased down men twice Daniel's size. Memories flickered, bright against the dark. Harper leaping through a window to corner a burglar. Harper standing guard during tense negotiations. Harper barking furiously until a missing child was found in a basement. Those were victories, moments when Daniel had felt certain of his place in the world. He'd had a badge then, and Harper had a vest emblazoned with the word police. They were a team. Now the badge was gone, the vest was gone, but the bond, unshaken. Daniel leaned back against the wall, listening to the crackle of the fire. Snow drifted down, catching in Harper's fur, melting against his warmth. Daniel broke off the last of the bread and slipped it to the dog. Harper took it gently, tail tapping the ground again. "You keep me alive, partner," Daniel whispered. "And I'll do the same for you." Across the street, a couple passed. The woman clutched her purse tighter, her eyes darting toward Daniel and Harper before sliding quickly away. The man muttered something about bums and strays. Their footsteps quickened until they were gone. Daniel lowered his gaze. There was a time when such looks pierced him, when shame burned hotter than hunger. But not tonight. Tonight, he had Harper, the fire, and a memory of dignity that no passerby could strip from him. He thought of how Harper still waited for commands, how he still looked at him as though Daniel were the axis of his world. There was loyalty in that gaze, a fierce, unyielding trust. And in return, Daniel found the will to keep walking, to keep enduring, even when the city offered nothing but cold shoulders and colder nights. The fire sputtered, wood collapsing into glowing embers. Daniel pulled Harper closer, his arm around the dog's broad shoulders. For a moment, the ridicule and the laughter faded. There was only the quiet bond between a man and his dog, two forgotten soldiers surviving together. And as the night deepened, Chicago moved around them, blind and hurried. But in that alley, by the fading glow of a barrel fire, something stronger than hunger kept them alive. The simple, stubborn loyalty of man and dog, holding on to each other against a world that had already turned away. The line outside the shelter stretched down the block, a string of figures wrapped in patched coats and thin blankets, shifting their weight from one frozen foot to the other. The sign above the door flickered weakly, St. Matthew's Mission. Beds. Tonight, 36. It was already past midnight, and the December wind gnawed at exposed skin like a predator. Daniel stood near the end of the line. Harper pressed close against his leg. He pulled his coat tighter, though the cold still bled through, sharp and merciless. Harper's breath puffed in little clouds, his body shivering despite his thick coat. Daniel lowered a hand to rest on his partner's head. "Almost there, boy," he whispered. The line shuffled forward slowly. The yellow glow of the shelter door felt like a promise, a slice of mercy in the heart of winter. Men near the front stamped their feet, muttering about hot soup and cots. Someone behind Daniel coughed, a deep, rattling sound, and then muttered bitterly, "Don't know why they let dogs in line. It's one more mouth for nothing." Daniel didn't answer. He'd learned silence was safer. He kept his gaze forward, on the door. Harper sat obediently, though his ears twitched at every harsh voice. At last, Daniel reached the steps. The worker at the door, a young man with tired eyes, looked at him, then down at Harper. His expression hardened. "No dogs," he said flatly. Daniel lifted his chin. "He's with me. Doesn't matter. Rules are rules." "He's not just a dog," Daniel said, voice steady. "He's my partner." The worker shook his head, already waving the next person forward. "Sorry, sir. If you want a bed, the animal stays outside." A cold weight settled in Daniel's chest. He looked down at Harper, who was watching him with those steady brown eyes, tail giving a small, hopeful sweep. Abandon him. Leave him tied out in the dark, in this bitter cold. No, never. "I'll pass," Daniel said quietly. The worker gave a little shrug, as if Daniel's decision meant nothing, and turned to the next man in line. The door closed briefly, spilling warm light, before shutting tight again. Daniel stepped back, the sting of rejection colder than the wind. Around him, people avoided his gaze. To them, he was just another shadow who didn't follow the rules. A man too stubborn, too broken, too foolish to take what was offered. They didn't see the choice he had just made. They didn't see the loyalty that bound him to Harper more tightly than any blanket or roof could. "Come on, partner," Daniel murmured, tugging the strap of his pack higher on his shoulder. Harper fell into step beside him, without hesitation, as though he knew that warmth had been denied them both, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that they were still together. They walked until the glow of the shelter faded behind them, swallowed by the sprawling dark of the city. The streets were nearly empty now, save for the occasional car skidding past on slushy pavement. Storefronts were shuttered, their holiday lights twinkling faintly behind glass, warm and unreachable. Daniel's limp grew heavier with every block, his breath ragged in the frozen air. He searched for somewhere they might rest, a corner out of the wind, a patch of concrete not yet claimed. Finally, under the shadow of a bridge, he found a spot shielded by a low wall. It wasn't much, but it would do. He lowered himself carefully, bones aching, and spread a thin blanket on the ground. Harper circled once before curling against him, body pressed close, sharing warmth. Daniel pulled the edges of the blanket around them both, though it was far too small to cover them fully. Above them, the city hummed indifferently, traffic rumbling, a siren wailing far off. The faint murmur of voices carried by the wind. No one saw them there. No one cared to. The city passed by, blind to the man and dog huddled in its shadows. Snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting from the dark sky. They settled on Harper's fur, melting slowly against his warmth. Daniel brushed them away with numb fingers, then rested his hand on the dog's side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. "You're all I've got," Daniel whispered. His voice cracked, the words pulled from a place deeper than pride. "And I'm not leaving you. Not ever." Harper shifted, pressing closer, his nose against Daniel's chest. The dog's eyes closed, his trust absolute, his faith unwavering. Daniel let his own eyes close. Hunger gnawed at him, cold seeped into his bones, but the weight of Harper against him was an anchor. It reminded him that he was not entirely lost, not yet. As long as they had each other, there was still a reason to fight through another night. The city above them never noticed. Pedestrians would walk by in the morning, glancing at the bundle beneath the bridge, and keep walking. To them, Daniel was just another forgotten soul, Harper just another stray. But under the falling snow, in that quiet, unseen corner, there was something more, something the city refused to see, a bond stronger than the storm. And so the night passed. The forgotten soldier and his loyal dog curled together against the cold, two lives reduced to shadows, but holding on to each other with a loyalty the world had long forgotten. Morning came grey and brittle, the kind of light that offered no warmth. Daniel stirred beneath the thin blanket, his back stiff from the cold ground under the bridge. Harper was already awake, his head lifted, ears turning at the sound of the city rousing itself, horns blaring in the distance, footsteps hurrying on sidewalks above. Daniel rubbed his eyes with a rough hand, his breath steaming in the cold. He sat up slowly, pulling his coat tighter around him, and looked at Harper. The dog's brown eyes met his, steady and unblinking. For a moment, Daniel was pulled backward through time, to days when that gaze had met him not in alleys or under bridges, but in squad cars and training fields, in the midst of duty and purpose. He let his eyes drift closed, and memory carried him away. The city had looked different then. He looked different then. A younger Daniel stood tall in uniform, his boots polished, his badge gleaming in the sun. The weight of responsibility on his chest had felt like honor, not burden. Harper was younger too, his coat sleek and dark, his energy boundless. On training fields, he had been lightning on four legs, leaping walls, scaling obstacles, locking onto scents with unshakable precision. Daniel remembered the first time Harper had sat at his side during a ceremony. The dog's ears perked, his gaze sharp as photographers snapped pictures. A decorated officer, they had called Daniel. A model team. There had been applause once. Crowds gathered to watch demonstrations. Harper disarming suspects, chasing decoys in padded suits. Children cheered. Parents pointed. Daniel remembered the swell of pride in his chest when Harper returned to him, panting, eyes bright, as though the world itself had no higher reward than Daniel's approving pat. The memory shifted, sharper now, alive with adrenaline. Night patrol. The city streets hum under fluorescent lights. A call came through the radio, an armed suspect on the run. Daniel had tightened his grip on Harper's leash, his pulse steady. "You ready, partner?" he whispered, and Harper's ears flicked forward, muscles taut. They had run together down alleys slick with rain, Harper straining at the leash until Daniel gave the word, "Go." In a blur, Harper was gone, paws pounding, body cutting through the night like a missile. Shouts echoed, then a crash, then the sound of Harper's bark, sharp, commanding, relentless. By the time Daniel rounded the corner, the suspect was on the ground, Harper's teeth gripping the sleeve of his jacket, holding him pinned but unharmed. The suspect's wide eyes had darted between dog and handler, realizing there was no escape. That was trust. That was teamwork. That was glory. Daniel opened his eyes again, staring at the grey city above him. The contrast hit like a blow. Now his boots were scuffed, his coat ragged. There was no badge on his chest, no applause, no cheers. The only eyes fixed on him now belonged to Harper, and even those were filmed with age, the muzzle streaked with grey. He reached out, resting his hand on the dog's fur. Harper leaned into the touch, sighing softly, and for a heartbeat, Daniel felt the echo of the man he used to be. "Remember those nights, boy," he murmured. "You were faster than lightning. Scared the hell out of them. And me. I thought we'd never stop." Harper blinked slowly, as if he remembered too. Daniel swallowed, his throat tight. It was cruel, he thought, how life turned heroes into shadows. One day he had been a man who commanded respect, who carried himself with purpose. Now, he was a figure people crossed the street to avoid. He wondered sometimes if the world had simply forgotten him, or if it had chosen to erase him altogether. But Harper had not forgotten. Harper still looked at him as though he were the same man, as though the years between hadn't stripped him of dignity. That gaze tethered him, pulled him back from despair when nights grew too long. He remembered another moment, years ago, after a particularly grueling case. Harper had tracked a missing boy through half the city, ignoring rain, traffic, and exhaustion. When they had found the boy, muddy, crying but alive, Daniel had knelt, pulling Harper close. "Good work, partner," he whispered, voice breaking. Harper had licked his cheek, tail wagging, oblivious to the crowd of reporters snapping photos. Those photos had once hung in Daniel's home. His wife had framed one of them, Daniel in uniform, Harper sitting proud at his side, a boy's arms wrapped around Harper's neck in gratitude. That photo had meant something then, a symbol of the man Daniel was, the work he did, the lives they touched. Now, that photo is gone, lost with everything else. Daniel looked at Harper again, at the dog who had walked beside him through every rise and fall. "We were somebody once," he said quietly. "And you're still somebody. Always will be." Harper shifted closer, pressing against Daniel's side, his body warm despite the cold air. Daniel closed his eyes. The memories hurt, but they also healed in a strange way. They reminded him that he had not always been invisible, that once, for a time, he had mattered. Maybe he still did. if only to Harper. The city moved around them, indifferent. Commuters hurried overhead, taxis honked, a bus roared down the street. No one stopped to look under the bridge. No one knew that beneath the city's morning rush sat a man who had once been decorated, a dog who had once been a hero. The glory had faded, replaced by obscurity. But the bond had not. And in that bond, Daniel found a sliver of strength to rise, to keep walking into another day. He stood slowly, slinging his pack over his shoulder, Harper falling into step beside him. They blended back into the streets, just another man and his dog unseen by the city, but carrying memories of a time when they had been more than shadows. The memories never came gently. They arrived like storms, sudden, violent, tearing through Daniel's mind until he was left raw. Some mornings the sound of a siren or the backfire of a car engine pulled him back without warning, and in an instant he was no longer in Chicago, but standing in the line of duty on the night everything had changed. It had been a domestic disturbance call. Routine, they'd said. A husband drunk, a wife screaming, neighbors reporting broken glass. Daniel and Harper had responded, as they had 100 times before, alert but steady, trained to step into chaos and restore order. But that night, chaos swallowed them. The man inside had more than liquor in his veins. Rage burned through him like gasoline, and in his hand was a gun. The moment Daniel breached the door, everything erupted. Shots rang out. Plaster exploded from the wall. Harper lunged. Daniel remembered the burn of fire across his thigh, a white-hot shock that stole his breath and drove him to the floor. He remembered Harper's snarl, feral and unyielding, pinning the man until other officers stormed in. When it was over, the suspect was in custody. The wife was safe. And Daniel lay bleeding, clutching at his leg, while Harper pressed close, whining low in his throat. That night marked the beginning of the end. The doctors had been kind. They spoke of honorable discharge and service completed with distinction, but beneath their careful words lay the truth. He would not run again, would not climb fences, would not charge headlong into danger with Harper at his side. His leg would heal enough for walking, but never for chasing. His career as an officer, as a handler, was over. He remembered staring at his badge the day they took it back. Polished, heavy, alive with meaning, and then gone, leaving his chest unbearably light. Harper stayed with him, of course. The department offered to reassign the dog, but Daniel refused. "He's mine," he said simply, his voice tight with a mixture of pain and defiance. Harper was more than a partner. He was family. Losing the badge was one thing. Losing Harper would have been the death of him. But the world did not pause to let him grieve. Bills stacked high, and his injury kept him from steady work. Medical retirement helped, but only just. Nights grew longer, shadows deeper. He found himself staring too long at bottles that whispered promises of forgetting, though he tried to resist. PTSD crept in quietly at first. Sleepless nights, startling at sudden noises. But soon it roared. Fireworks sent his heart racing. Crowded rooms left him breathless. And in his dreams, he was back on that floor, bleeding, helpless, the sound of gunfire ringing in his ears. His wife, Eleanor, tried to hold on. She pressed his hand in the dark, whispered that they would find a way, told him that love was stronger than trauma. And for a while he believed her. But pain has a way of eroding even the strongest vows. His temper grew short, his silences longer. He shut her out, not because he wanted to, but because he no longer knew how to let her in. Then came the night of the accident. A car, a patch of black ice, headlights cutting through the dark. Eleanor was gone before the ambulance even arrived. Daniel's world collapsed. The family drifted away after that. His in-laws, once warm, now cold with blame. His own brother, weary of the phone calls unanswered, the visits where Daniel refused to leave the couch. Words were exchanged, sharp, final. One by one, the people in his life fell silent, until only Harper remained. Harper, who pressed his nose into Daniel's palm when grief threatened to consume him. Harper, who curled against him when nights grew too long. Harper, who did not care that Daniel had no badge, no job, no family left. The man who had once been decorated, honored, respected, was now a ghost in his own life. He wandered from temporary housing to motels, then to couches, then finally to the streets when money thinned and debts thickened. He thought, more than once, of ending it. The weight of despair was heavy, the silence of loss unbearable. But each time, Harper's eyes stopped him. Steady, loyal, unwavering. Those eyes reminded him that he was not entirely alone, that someone, at least, still believed in him. And so he kept moving, step by weary step, into the obscurity of a life he had never imagined. Back under the bridge, Daniel blinked against the present. His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed Harper's fur. The dog shifted closer, sensing the storm in his handler's chest. "Guess we fell pretty far, huh, partner?" Daniel murmured, voice raw. "From medals and parades to this." Harper's tail thumped once, slow and steady, as if to say, "It doesn't matter. I'm still here." Daniel swallowed hard. There was dignity in that, he thought. Even in the fall, even in the wreckage of a life that had once stood tall, there remained a bond no bullet, no loss, no rejection could break. The city might not see it. The world might not care. But Daniel knew. Harper knew. And that was enough to carry them through another day, another night. The day had been long, the kind that stretched endlessly, offering little more than hunger and cold. By dusk, Daniel's feet ached from miles of walking, his limp heavier than usual. Harper kept pace, his gait steady, but Daniel noticed something different. A slight hitch in the dog's step, a faint wince whenever his paw pressed down on the icy concrete. He slowed, watching closely. Harper tried to mask it, tried to walk as though nothing was wrong, but Daniel's eyes had trained on this dog for years. He saw it immediately. "Easy, partner," Daniel murmured, kneeling down on the sidewalk beneath a flickering street lamp. Harper stopped obediently, tail giving one small wag, his eyes fixed on Daniel's face. The bond between them was so deep, so ingrained, that Harper would stand in a storm and wait for his command without complaint. Daniel lifted the dog's paw gently, turning it over in his calloused hands. The pad was torn, a gash cutting across where the ice and salt of the streets had bitten deep. Dried blood clung to the fur around it. Daniel's chest tightened. Harper had not made a sound, not once whined or pulled away. He had kept walking beside Daniel, silent in his pain. "You stubborn old soldier," Daniel whispered, his throat aching. "Why didn't you tell me?" Harper only leaned forward, resting his head briefly against Daniel's shoulder. The city moved around them. People hurried past, heads down, boots crunching against snow. Some glanced at the man crouched with his dog, but quickly looked away. To them, it was nothing. Just another stray, another vagrant clinging to something in the cold. They didn't see the way Daniel's hands shook, not from the weather, but from the weight of responsibility. He had nothing left. No money for a vet, no bandages, no antiseptic. But he would not let Harper suffer. Not him. Never him. Daniel stripped off one glove with his teeth and tugged at the fraying hem of his jacket. The fabric was worn thin, but it would serve. With a grunt, he tore a strip free, then another. He pressed the cloth gently against the wound, Harper flinching but holding still, trusting him completely. Daniel wrapped the strip around the paw, tying it firm but not too tight, his fingers clumsy in the bitter air. The wind cut against his skin, but Daniel kept working, murmuring softly as he did. "I know it hurts. Just hang on. We'll get you through this." Harper's eyes never left him. Even in pain, the dog watched with unshakable faith, as if he knew that whatever Daniel did, it was enough. When the makeshift bandage was secured, Daniel sat back on his heels, exhaling slowly. His jacket now hung ragged, its edge torn away, but Harper's paw was wrapped. The bleeding slowed. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was something. Daniel stroked Harper's head, his voice quiet. "You've carried me through worse. Let me carry you now." For a moment, he remembered the countless times Harper had saved him. The night Harper dragged him back from a dark alley when his leg gave out, refusing to let him collapse. The day Harper had barked until neighbors called an ambulance when Daniel's chest seized from a panic attack. The years of silent companionship, each moment a reminder that loyalty did not fade when life crumbled. Daniel thought of all that, and his chest ached, not from cold, not from hunger, but from love. A pair of teenagers passed on the other side of the street, their laughter cutting through the evening air. One pointed and muttered, "Look at him, bandaging a dog with his clothes. What a waste." Daniel didn't answer. He only looked at Harper, who sat tall despite the hurt paw, his posture proud even in patched-up cloth. Daniel saw no waste here. He saw the last good thing in his life, the truest companion he had ever known. The city might not see it. Strangers might laugh, dismiss, even scorn. But in this quiet act, tearing away what little he had to protect Harper, Daniel found strength. Not the kind that earned medals or applause, but the kind that endured silently, unnoticed, in the corners of the world. Night deepened. Daniel and Harper moved slowly to a quieter spot, under an awning that shielded them from snow. Daniel laid his blanket down, easing Harper onto it, careful of the bandaged paw. He settled beside him, pulling his coat tighter against the cold gap where fabric had been torn away. He felt the wind seep through, biting sharper now. But he didn't regret it. Every shiver was worth it if it meant Harper was spared a fraction of pain. As Harper rested his head on Daniel's lap, a soft sigh escaping him, Daniel whispered, "We're still in this fight, you and me." He leaned back against the wall, eyes heavy, body weary. Yet somewhere inside, a flame still burned, fragile but alive. It was the kind of strength no one could see, the kind that didn't make headlines, that wasn't written in commendations. The strength of a man who had lost everything, yet still refused to abandon the one soul who had never abandoned him. Snow fell again, blanketing the city in white. Above them, neon lights flickered, buses rumbled, the world kept moving. But beneath the awning, in the hush of the storm, there was a different rhythm. The steady heartbeat of a man and his dog, bound together not by circumstance, but by choice. The city might not see it, but Daniel knew, Harper knew, and in the end, that was enough. The city wore a strange kind of silence that morning. It wasn't the hush of peace, but of unease, a stillness threaded with whispers and sharp glances. Snow lay heavy on rooftops, streets slick with slush, while the sky pressed low and grey. Across town, squad cars idled with lights flashing, their beams painting the snow in red and blue. Radios crackled with clipped voices. Amber alert. Female child, 8 years old, missing since late last night. Her name was Mia. The photographs went out first, her face plastered across news stations, phone screens, flyers run off hastily at police precincts. Brown hair tucked under a knitted hat, eyes wide and uncertain, 8 years old. Last, seen walking home from a friend's apartment in a neighborhood where street lamps flickered out too often. Detectives spread across the city, canvassing, knocking on doors, asking questions. Volunteers joined the search, trudging through alleys with flashlights, calling her name. Each hour that passed without news grew heavier, like another weight pressing against the city's chest. Daniel didn't hear the announcement directly. He wasn't in the loop of those who received alerts on their phones or tuned into radios. His world existed on the margins. He saw what others watched, overheard what others muttered, glimpsed what spilled from the lives of those still tethered to society. That afternoon, he and Harper moved slowly through downtown, the cold gnawing deeper than usual. Daniel walked with his head lowered, hands stuffed into his ragged coat pockets, while Harper padded at his side, ears twitching, ever alert. They paused outside a pawn shop, its windows fogged from the heat inside. On the far wall, a television hung above glass cases filled with tarnished jewelry and second-hand electronics. The volume was low, but the images were clear. A young girl's face, the caption bold across the screen. Amber alert. 8-year-old missing. Daniel squinted through the glass, his breath clouding the window. A pang shot through him. Not recognition, but something deeper, older. He had seen too many missing faces in his career. Too many families waiting in silence, praying for a miracle that often never came. The memory of Harper barking furiously in basements, tracking scents in the dead of night, rushed back like a tide. Another one, Daniel murmured under his breath. His voice was quiet, carried away by the wind. Harper tilted his head as if he'd understood. A group of people stood nearby, huddled against the cold, their eyes fixed on the same broadcast through the shop window. Their breath puffed in the air as they whispered, "They said she's been gone almost 12 hours. In this weather, God help her. Parents are begging for information, anyone who saw her." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He felt the eyes of the group flick toward him briefly, then slide away. He was used to that. To them, he was another face in the crowd, another drifter lingering where he wasn't welcome. None of them looked at Harper long, though the dog's gaze was sharp, fixed on the television as though something about the girl's image stirred an instinct buried deep. Daniel tugged lightly at Harper's collar. "Come on, boy," he said softly. They moved on, the murmurs fading behind them, but the face of the little girl stayed with him. Later, as they walked past a convenience store, Daniel caught sight of the same alert playing on another screen inside. This time, the sound carried faintly through the glass, the trembling voice of a police spokesperson urging vigilance, asking the public to stay alert. Harper paused at the doorway, nose twitching. His tail flicked once, then stilled, his ears pricking forward. Daniel frowned, watching the dog's body tighten. "What is it?" he asked, crouching slightly. Harper didn't move, only stared toward the store, as if the voice on the television belonged to someone familiar, or as if the face on the screen meant more than Daniel could understand. Daniel laid a hand on Harper's neck. "It's just the news, partner. Just the news." Still, Harper lingered a moment longer before following Daniel down the block. As dusk fell, the city's tension grew heavier. Flyers appeared taped to bus stops, stapled to telephone poles. MIA, age 8, last seen. Her face was everywhere now, watching from the edges of Daniel's path. Shoppers leaving stores carried conversations about her, shaking their heads. Strangers exchanged worried glances at crosswalks. Daniel felt it in his chest, an old ache resurfacing. The helplessness of waiting, the hollow echo of knowing a child was missing somewhere in the sprawl of alleys and brick. He remembered parents clutching his hands years ago, whispering desperate pleas. Find her. Please. Find him. Bring them back to me. He had delivered hope before, guided by Harper's nose, by the dog's relentless drive. But now he was just another shadow on the sidewalk, no longer part of that world. Under an overpass, Daniel sank down onto the cold concrete, Harper curling beside him. The sound of sirens drifted faintly from the north side, urgent and sharp. Daniel leaned his head against the wall, closing his eyes. He didn't know why this case clung to him more than others he'd heard in passing. Maybe it was the girl's eyes on the screen, so wide, so young. Maybe it was the way Harper had stilled, ears pricked, as though he sensed something the city could not. Daniel's hand found Harper's fur, rubbing absently. "Another missing kid," he whispered. "The world doesn't change, does it?" Harper shifted, resting his head against Daniel's knee, as if to say the fight wasn't over. Above them, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting through the yellow haze of streetlights. The city searched. The parents wept. And somewhere, an 8-year-old girl waited in the shadows, unseen, her fate hanging in the balance. By morning, the city's anxiety had turned into movement. Flyers appeared everywhere, plastered to lampposts, taped to bus stops, shoved into the hands of anyone willing to take them. The girl's face stared back from every corner, her small features framed by a woolen hat, eyes wide in the way children's eyes often are, innocent, trusting. MIA, age 8, missing. The streets buzzed with conversation. Neighbors clustered on sidewalks, their voices hushed but urgent. Volunteers combed through alleys and parks, calling her name in tones that carried both hope and fear. Police cars crawled past with sirens off, but lights spinning, their presence a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. Daniel and Harper moved among it all, unnoticed, like shadows slipping through the current of the city's worry. Daniel kept his collar pulled high, his gaze low. But Harper's ears turned constantly, nose lifting to scents carried by the wind. The dog walked with a different energy that morning, taut, focused, as if the air itself carried a secret only he could sense. At an intersection, a volunteer handed Daniel a flyer. The man barely looked at him, just shoved the paper forward before turning to press another into someone else's hand. Daniel accepted it quietly, his fingers rough against the thin sheet. He looked down at the picture. Mia's face, framed by bold letters, the words "Last Seen" screaming from the page. Beneath the photograph, a number to call, an appeal for information. Something tugged at Daniel's chest. He folded the paper once, twice, tucking it into his pocket. Harper sniffed at him, then at the pocket, as if recognizing the child's image carried weight. "You remember this, don't you, boy?" Daniel murmured. "How many times did we follow faces like this?" Harper's ears flicked, his gaze sharp, as though he hadn't forgotten at all. The wind picked up, sharp with lake air. Flyers ripped loose from their tape and whirled through the streets like desperate birds. One fluttered down near Daniel, skittering across the slush. Harper lunged before Daniel could move, pinning it with a paw. His nose pressed hard against the paper, his body tense. Daniel frowned, crouching beside him. "Easy," he whispered. But Harper didn't lift his head. His tail was stiff, his nostrils flaring as though the ink and paper carried more than an image. Something real. Something alive. Daniel pried the flyer gently from under Harper's paw. The dog's eyes locked onto it, unblinking, ears rigid, body humming with alertness. It was the same look Daniel had seen countless times in uniform. The look Harper wore when a trail was close, when danger was near, when instinct blazed like fire in his veins. "What is it?" Daniel asked softly. "What do you smell?" But Harper couldn't answer. He only stared, chest heaving, then turned his head sharply toward a passing car, as if the scent had drifted further, as if it belonged to something beyond their reach. Around them, the city carried on in its frantic rhythm. A woman pushed a stroller past, whispering to another, "They say she could be anywhere by now." A man stapled more flyers to a pole, muttering prayers under his breath. Children clutched their parents' hands tighter, eyes darting at every stranger. Daniel watched it all, the unease growing in him. He felt it in Harper too, the way the dog moved more sharply, nose to the wind, every sound pulling his attention. Harper was restless, in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years. "You're trying to tell me something," Daniel said quietly, walking slower now, letting Harper lead. The dog tugged forward, then circled back, nose close to the ground before lifting to the air again. But with each step, the trail dissolved in the ocean of scents, the city too crowded, too chaotic. Daniel clenched his jaw. Without a badge, without authority, he was just a man and his dog again, wandering. No one would listen if he walked into a precinct and said Harper had caught a trace. They'd see only a homeless veteran, worn down and unsteady, clinging to a past that no longer belonged to him. And yet, the way Harper's body vibrated with urgency, the way his eyes burned with focus, it stirred something deep inside Daniel. Instinct. Memory. The knowledge that this dog, even after all these years, had not lost what made him extraordinary. The city pressed on. Afternoon shadows stretched long, the cold deepening as the sun dipped behind steel towers. Volunteers still called out Mia's name, their voices echoing down alleys. Police cars parked on corners, officers scanning faces in the crowd. The sense of dread grew thicker with every passing hour. Daniel and Harper found a bench outside a shuttered cafe. Daniel lowered himself carefully, the flyer still folded in his pocket. Harper sat at his feet, nose twitching, gaze scanning the street as though searching for what others couldn't see. Daniel rested a hand on his dog's head. "We're not in that world anymore," he whispered, though the words were more for himself than Harper. "It's not our fight. Not anymore." But Harper's steady breathing, the tension in his frame, told a different story. To him, it was always their fight, always their trail to follow, always their duty. The wind gusted again, scattering another handful of flyers across the street. One drifted close, landing against Harper's paw. The dog looked down at it, then up at Daniel, eyes fierce, as if demanding, "See what I see. Listen. Trust me." Daniel swallowed hard, his chest tight. He remembered nights long ago, when Harper's alerts had meant the difference between life and death, when trusting him without hesitation had led them to the lost, the hidden, the forgotten. Now, sitting on a bench in a city that no longer remembered their names, Daniel wondered if that instinct still mattered. He reached into his pocket, unfolding the flyer once more. Mia's face stared back at him, her small eyes wide and waiting. Daniel's gaze shifted to Harper, who had not looked away. The city buzzed around them. Searchers calling, strangers whispering, police scanning. And in the middle of it all, a forgotten man and his old dog sat quietly, caught between the world that had cast them aside and the call of duty that still echoed in their bones. Daniel's hand tightened on the paper. Harper's ears flicked. The storm was building. The night pressed in like a weight, heavy and unrelenting. The temperature had plummeted with the setting sun, the kind of cold that didn't just sting skin, but reached into bone and marrow, hollowing a man from the inside out. The streets glistened with ice where slush had frozen over, and the wind came off the lake in bitter waves that cut through layers of fabric as though they weren't there at all. Daniel moved slower than usual, each step dragging, his limp more pronounced. His breath came in sharp clouds, quick to dissolve into the darkness. Harper walked close at his side, his body brushing Daniel's leg now and then, as if to steady him, his own breath puffing in the frigid air. They turned into an alley, searching for shelter. The brick walls trapped some of the wind, but the air was still cruel, biting at exposed skin. Daniel lowered himself carefully against the wall, his knees stiff, his back groaning. He pulled his thin blanket from the rucksack, spreading it on the ground before easing down. Harper curled against him without hesitation, pressing his body along Daniel's side, seeking warmth, but also giving it. Daniel wrapped the blanket around them both, though it was hardly enough. Still, it was better than nothing. He rested his chin lightly on Harper's head, feeling the dog's steady breathing beneath the cold. "Just you and me again, partner," Daniel murmured, his voice quiet, raw with fatigue. From somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, long, low, urgent. They weren't the quick bursts of traffic stops, but the drawn-out cries of a city still searching. Another patrol car roared past the mouth of the alley, its lights flashing across the snow like jagged streaks of color. The city was on edge. Everyone could feel it. The missing girl's face lingered on televisions, on flyers plastered to walls, in whispered conversations at bus stops. Parents held their children tighter. Strangers cast suspicious glances at one another. Fear hung heavy in the air, sharper than the cold. Daniel felt it too. He had lived long enough in the city to know the rhythm of its streets. And tonight, the rhythm was broken. The sirens didn't fade. They multiplied. Harper lifted his head, ears pricked, gaze fixed on the distant lights that painted the sky. A low rumble rose in his chest, not of aggression, but of alertness, a sound Daniel recognized well. "I know," Daniel whispered, rubbing the dog's fur with numb fingers. "Something's out there. Something's wrong." The cold gnawed at him, merciless. His hands shook as he pulled his coat tighter, though the fabric was too thin to do much good. His toes felt distant, as though they belonged to someone else. He pressed closer to Harper, grateful for the warmth of another heartbeat against him. It was a cruel thing, Daniel thought, that a man could go from medals and honors to fighting for scraps in an alley, clinging to a dog for warmth. But as he rested his forehead against Harper's fur, he knew it wasn't shameful. It was survival, and survival was its own kind of honor. Snowflakes drifted down, silent, settling on Harper's back. Daniel brushed them away absently, his fingers trembling. The dog shifted, pressing his nose against Daniel's chest as if to remind him he wasn't alone. Daniel closed his eyes, letting the sound of Harper's breathing anchor him. The city could rage on, could scream with sirens and searchlights, but here, in this narrow alley, it was just them. Two survivors, huddled against the cold. The minutes dragged on. The cold deepened. Daniel's mind began to wander, blurring between memory and present. He saw flashes of warm rooms long gone, of his wife's laughter echoing in kitchens, of Harper younger and bounding across training fields. For a moment, he almost let himself sink into those memories, to stay there, because they were warmer than the air around him. But Harper's sudden movement pulled him back. The dog shifted sharply, ears rigid, gaze fixed toward the alley's mouth. A growl rumbled low, vibrating through Daniel's ribs. Daniel lifted his head, blinking the fog from his vision. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. Harper didn't move. His body was coiled tight, alert. Daniel strained his ears, but all he heard was the moan of the wind and the distant thrum of the city. Still, he trusted Harper. Always had. He rubbed the dog's side gently. "Stay sharp, partner. You know better than I do." Another siren screamed past, closer now, bouncing off the walls of the alley. The sound seemed endless, stretching through the night like a warning. The city's unease grew sharper, and Daniel felt it in his bones. He wasn't part of the search, not anymore. But he understood the stakes. He'd been there once, part of the thin line between lost and found, between despair and hope. Now, he was on the outside looking in. But Harper still had that fire, that refusal to ignore what others missed. Daniel tightened the blanket around them, trying to shut out the cold, but his gaze lingered on Harper's tense frame. Something was building, something the city wasn't ready for. And somehow, he knew Harper would be at the center of it. Hours crawled past. The cold grew crueler, biting at skin, gnawing at resolve. Daniel fought to stay awake, his body aching, exhaustion pulling at him. Harper's warmth kept him tethered, but even the dog's breathing had slowed. His body pressed tight, as though guarding his handler from the night itself. Daniel's last thought before sleep claimed him was of the girl's face on the flyer, wide-eyed, waiting. He didn't know why it clung to him so fiercely, but it did. Maybe it was because Harper seemed to sense her too, as if her presence lingered in the air, just out of reach. Snow fell heavier now, blanketing the city in silence. Sirens still echoed faintly, their cries cutting through the night. And in a narrow alley, unseen by the world, a homeless veteran and his aging dog clung to each other, fighting the cold with nothing but loyalty and breath, their bond unbroken even in the cruelest winter. The night had settled deep, colder than the last. Chicago lay wrapped in silence, broken only by the occasional wail of a siren echoing far away. Daniel sat with his back against the brick wall of an alley, the thin blanket drawn around himself and Harper. His body ached with fatigue, his mind heavy with the weight of memories he couldn't shake. The city had gone to sleep, but unease lingered in the air, sharp as the frost that clung to every surface. Harper had been restless all evening. While Daniel shifted, trying to find comfort against the hard ground, the dog's head snapped up at the smallest sound, the scurry of a rat, the hiss of wind against metal, the creak of a distant dumpster lid. Each time, Harper settled again, though not fully. His ears twitched even in stillness. His body coiled with a tension Daniel hadn't seen in years. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, rubbing the dog's back with a gloved hand. "It's just another night." But Harper wasn't convinced. His eyes glinted in the dim light, focused on something Daniel couldn't see, as though the city itself were whispering secrets only he could hear. Close to midnight, the unease sharpened. Harper froze suddenly, his head lifting, nostrils flaring. A growl rose low in his throat, vibrating against Daniel's leg. Daniel stiffened. "What is it?" he whispered, peering into the darkness at the mouth of the alley. Nothing moved. The street beyond lay empty, washed in the weak glow of a flickering street lamp. Harper's growl deepened, then cut off. He surged to his feet, muscles tight, ears forward. Daniel barely had time to rise before the dog lunged. "Harper!" Daniel called, his voice cracking in alarm. The German shepherd ignored him. With a sudden burst of speed, Harper tore down the alley, nails scraping against the frozen pavement, breath clouding in the cold. Daniel stumbled forward, his heart racing, struggling to follow. His bad leg buckled beneath him, but he pushed through, his hand clutching the wall for balance. "Harper! Wait!" But the dog was already gone, a shadow swallowed by darker shadows. Daniel's pulse thundered as he limped after him, confusion burning in his chest. In all the years they'd been together, Harper had never disobeyed like this. Even in the worst chaos, even under gunfire, Harper had waited for Daniel's command. But tonight, instinct had overridden loyalty, pulling him forward with a force that could not be restrained. Daniel reached the street, his breath ragged, scanning the night. Harper's silhouette flashed ahead, cutting across the empty road before vanishing into another alley. "Damn it!" Daniel hissed under his breath, stumbling after him. His boots slipped on ice. His bad leg screamed with every step, but he pressed on. Harper's bark erupted suddenly, sharp and urgent, reverberating against the walls of the narrow streets. It wasn't a warning bark. It was the one Daniel remembered from the old days, the sound Harper made when he was onto something. A sound that had once meant the difference between lost and found. Daniel's chest tightened. Memories flooded him. Harper barking at a basement door until officers found a missing boy inside. Harper barking in the woods until a lost hiker was rescued. That bark had never been wrong. But what could he have found now, in the dead of night, in a city that had forgotten them? "Hold on, boy," Daniel muttered, forcing his body forward. "I'm coming." The alley swallowed him in darkness, the stench of garbage thick in the air. His breath came hard, the ache in his leg nearly buckling him. But then he saw it. Harper's form at the far end, rigid, barking furiously into the shadows. His body was tense, tail straight, as if standing guard over something unseen. "Harper!" Daniel rasped, stumbling closer. The dog didn't turn. His focus was absolute, every fiber of him locked onto the dark recess of the alley. His paws scraped against the pavement as he lunged again, claws sparking faintly against concrete, barking louder now, desperate, commanding. Daniel's stomach dropped. Harper wasn't chasing anything. He was alert. And Daniel knew deep in his bones that whatever had pulled Harper into the night was no accident. He reached the dog, grabbing hold of his collar, trying to steady him. "Easy, easy," Daniel panted, but Harper resisted, muscles straining, eyes locked forward. Daniel squinted into the dark. At first, he saw only the hulking shape of a dumpster, its lid half closed, a layer of frost, glistening under the weak light. The stench of rotting food drifted thick, but Harper's gaze wasn't on the ground. It was fixed on that dumpster, as if it held more than garbage. Daniel's breath caught. He tightened his grip on Harper, his pulse hammering in his ears. "What the hell is it, boy?" Harper barked again, louder this time, his body trembling with urgency. Daniel's hand shook as he reached for the edge of the metal lid. Cold bit into his fingers as he pulled it open. The hinges screeched, the sound splitting the silence. And in that moment, Daniel understood. Harper hadn't bolted into the night blindly. He had been called, not by command, but by something deeper, something instinctive, something that told him there was more in this darkness than anyone else could see. The cold pressed closer, cruel and unrelenting. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, blending with Harper's sharp barks. The city was on edge, searching blindly. But here, in a forgotten alley, a German shepherd had chosen his path, dragging a broken man behind him. Daniel's heart pounded as he stared into the open dumpster, Harper's barking echoing in his ears. Something was inside. Harper's bark split the night like a blade, sharp and relentless. Each echo bounced off the brick walls of the alley, carrying urgency, insistence. His claws scraped against the rusted side of the dumpster, metal shrieking under his weight. The dog lunged and pulled back, lunged again, as though the very heart of danger, or salvation, was locked inside. Daniel staggered beside him, chest heaving from the chase. His breath came out in heavy clouds, his bad leg trembling beneath him. He grabbed Harper's collar with both hands, trying to steady him. "Easy, partner, easy!" But Harper wouldn't yield. The dog's muscles vibrated, every fiber of him locked on that dumpster, every bark louder than the one before. Daniel looked at the metal box, his stomach twisting. To anyone else, it was just a dumpster, piled with refuse, frozen shut at the edges from weeks of Chicago's bitter winter. But Harper wasn't barking at trash. Daniel knew that sound, had lived by it once. Harper had never wasted his voice. If he was alerted, there was a reason. Always. Daniel's hands trembled as he pressed a palm to the cold steel. "All right, boy," he whispered, his voice rough, weary. "I trust you." "I always have." The lid was heavy, its hinges corroded from years of weather. Daniel tugged once, twice. Metal groaned but didn't give. Harper barked harder, his claws raking at the seam. Daniel cursed under his breath, shifting his weight, ignoring the ache in his thigh as he braced both hands against the edge and pulled with everything left in him. The lid screeched open, the sound sharp and grating, echoing down the alley. A foul wave of rot spilled out. Spoiled food, damp cardboard, the stink of decay. Daniel flinched, covering his mouth with his sleeve. Harper shoved his nose forward, whining now, his bark transforming into something different, higher pitched, almost desperate. Then Daniel heard it. A sound so faint, he thought at first it was just the ringing in his ears from the effort. But no. The longer he held his breath, the clearer it became. A whimper. Small, muffled, trembling. Daniel froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. He looked down into the shadows of the dumpster, blinking against the dark. "Dear God," he whispered. He pushed the lid wider, ignoring the sting of rust cutting his palms. Inside, beneath layers of torn plastic bags and damp newspapers, something moved. A bundle, small, fragile, shifted. Another whimper broke the silence, soft but piercing, the unmistakable cry of a child clinging to the last scraps of strength. "Mia," Daniel breathed, though he hadn't meant to say it aloud. The face from the flyers flashed in his mind, and suddenly the city's fear had a shape, a heartbeat, lying just inches away from him. Harper pawed at the edge, his claws scraping metal again, frantic to reach her. "All right," Daniel muttered, pushing the dog gently back. I've got it." His hands shook as he peeled away the trash, his breath burning in his lungs. The stink was suffocating, but he didn't care. He pulled back bags, pushed aside damp cardboard, until at last his hands brushed fabric. Thin, damp, a blanket wrapped tight around a small body. The bundle stirred. A face emerged from the folds, pale in the dim light, lips trembling blue from the cold. Eyes opened, wide, frightened, glistening. The little girl looked up at him, her voice no stronger than a whisper. Don't let them find me again." The words cracked something deep inside Daniel. His throat closed, tears burning unexpectedly at the corners of his eyes. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "You're safe now. I've got you." Harper whined, pressing his nose toward the girl, his tail giving a slow, tentative wag. The child's small hand reached weakly from the blanket, brushing against the dog's muzzle. Harper stilled, then leaned closer, letting her fingers rest against his fur. The barking stopped, replaced by a low rumble of reassurance, as if Harper understood that the fight wasn't over, but the worst had passed. Daniel's chest ached at the sight. Even in her fear, even in her weakness, the girl clung not to him, but to Harper. And maybe that was right. Harper was the one who had found her, who had refused to give up, who had dragged Daniel into this moment. Daniel shifted carefully, sliding his arms beneath her fragile body. She was so light, frighteningly so, her bones sharp under skin, her body stiff from cold. He lifted her gently, tucking the blanket tighter around her. Her head dropped against his shoulder, her breath shallow but steady. "I've got you," Daniel whispered again, his voice steadier this time. The alley was silent now, save for Harper's soft whine and the faint rasp of the girl's breathing. The city beyond still roared with sirens, still searching blind, but here, in this forgotten corner, she had been found, not by the flashing lights, not by the crowds, but by a dog who refused to ignore his instincts. Daniel looked at Harper, his voice low and reverent. "You did it, partner. You saved her." The dog's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. In them, Daniel saw everything they had been, everything they still were, despite the years of loss and exile. The bond hadn't dimmed. It had only waited for its moment to rise again. Daniel adjusted the girl in his arms, feeling her slight weight against his chest. He knew the next steps: get her warm, get her help. But right now, in this alley, he let himself pause, let himself feel the enormity of it. They had been invisible for so long, cast aside, ridiculed, left in the shadows. But Harper had cut through that invisibility with a single bark, a refusal to let the city overlook what mattered most. Daniel's throat tightened as he whispered, "The world might not see us, but you always see what matters." Snow began to fall again, flakes drifting silently down, settling on the rusted metal, on Daniel's shoulders, on Harper's back. In the quiet, the faint whimper of the girl mingled with the dog's steady breathing, a fragile reminder of life clinging stubbornly against the cold. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt it. A flicker of purpose, fragile but real. Daniel's arms trembled as he cradled the small bundle he had pulled from the dumpster. The girl was feather light, frighteningly so, her frame hidden beneath layers of a dirty blanket that smelled of mildew and rot. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the flickering light of the street lamp, and her lips quivered with the chill. Harper pressed close, his body brushing Daniel's knee, nose lifted toward the child, whining softly. His earlier fury, those violent barks that had split the night, had faded into something gentler now, protective. The girl stirred, her lashes fluttering against her cheeks as her eyes opened just enough to see. Wide, dark, frightened. She looked up at Daniel briefly, before shifting her gaze toward Harper. With effort, her small hand pushed from the blanket, trembling as it reached toward the dog. Her voice was barely audible, fragile as broken glass. "Don't let them find me again." Daniel's chest constricted, his throat tightening around the words he wanted to say. He looked down at her hand, shaking, reaching not for him, but for Harper. The dog leaned in without hesitation, pressing his nose against her palm. She clung to him weakly, her fingers curling into his fur, as though he were the only thing in the world that could keep her safe. Harper stayed still, letting her hold him, his tail sweeping once along the ground, as if to reassure her. "I'm here. You're safe." Daniel lowered himself to the pavement, back pressed against the cold wall of the alley, pulling the girl carefully into his lap. The blanket slipped, and he tucked it back around her shoulders, his fingers brushing skin that was cold to the touch. He swallowed hard. "You're all right now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure she could hear. His voice cracked with the weight of the moment. "No one's going to hurt you. Not while we're here." The girl shuddered, curling tighter into the blanket, but her grip on Harper did not loosen. She buried her face against his neck, her voice muffled but urgent, repeating, "Don't let them find me. Don't let them find me." Daniel met Harper's gaze over her small form. For a moment, it was as if the dog understood the full weight of what had been placed on them. His eyes were steady, fierce, and filled with something that made Daniel's chest ache, a determination Daniel himself thought he had lost long ago. The city moved beyond the alley, unaware of what had just unfolded in the shadows. A car passed at the end of the street, headlights slicing briefly into the dark. But no one saw the man and his dog bent over a trembling child. No one knew that a miracle had just been pulled from a heap of rusted metal and refused. Daniel brushed the girl's hair back from her face, tucking it beneath the blanket. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, though he already knew. She didn't answer, only clutched Harper tighter, her small body pressed into his warmth. Harper licked her cheek once, a soft, deliberate gesture, and she let out a shaky breath, her fear easing just slightly. Daniel nodded slowly. "Mia," he murmured, the name he had seen printed on all those flyers. Saying it aloud gave the moment weight, reality. "We've got you now." The cold bit harder the longer they sat, but Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. Not with the girl trembling in his arms, not with Harper standing guard beside them. He felt the rise and fall of her shallow breaths against his chest, each one a fragile thread tethering her to the world. He thought of the words she had whispered. "Don't let them find me again." The plea of a child too young to carry such fear. Whatever she had endured before this night, it was enough to carve terror deep into her bones. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hand smoothing the blanket across her shoulders. "No one's going to find you," he promised quietly, though he wasn't sure how he would keep that vow. But promises mattered, and in that moment, he would have given anything to keep it true. Harper shifted suddenly, his ears pricking toward the alley's entrance. A low growl hummed in his throat, protective but controlled. Daniel's body stiffened. He couldn't see anyone, but Harper's instincts had always been sharper than his own. "It's all right, boy," Daniel said, though his voice betrayed his unease. He pulled Mia closer, shielding her as best he could. Harper stepped forward slightly, his body tense, his presence a barrier between them and whatever lay beyond. But no shadow emerged, no footsteps approached, only the wind, carrying with it the distant wail of sirens and the muted hum of the restless city. Slowly, Harper lowered his stance, returning to Mia's side, brushing against her, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. The girl loosened her grip just enough to look up at Daniel. Her eyes were watery, her lips trembling as she whispered again, "Please, don't let them find me." Daniel's heart broke in the quiet alley. He rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his voice low but firm. "They won't. Not while we're here." Time blurred. The cold was cruel, but Daniel didn't feel it anymore. All he felt was the fragile weight in his arms, the steady warmth of Harper pressed close, and the heavy knowledge that something dark had placed this child in the shadows. And somehow, against all odds, Harper had led them to her. Daniel had thought he was finished with the world, that the city had no use for him anymore. But looking down at Mia, clinging to Harper as though he were her last protector, Daniel felt something stir inside him, an old instinct, an old purpose he thought had long been buried. He was not finished. Harper was not finished, not while children disappeared into the dark, and fear silenced their voices. Snow began to fall again, drifting gently into the alley. It caught in Harper's fur, settled on Daniel's shoulders, and melted on the girl's pale skin. She stirred faintly, eyes closing, her breaths slowing but steady now, her small body safe in the circle of warmth Daniel and Harper had formed around her. Daniel looked up into the night sky, his voice little more than a whisper. "We found her, partner. We actually found her." Harper sat tall beside him, eyes fixed outward, watching the world beyond the alley. His chest rose and fell with slow breaths, steady and sure, as if vowing to keep watch until dawn. And in the shadows of a city too often blind, a forgotten man and his loyal dog had pulled a child from the dark. Not with authority, not with power, but with instinct, faith, and a bond that refused to break. The alley was their whole world for a moment. Daniel, Harper, and the fragile child pressed against his chest. The cold was a bit deep, but Daniel barely felt it. Every shallow breath from Mia was a reminder she was alive. Harper sat close, body pressed against her, eyes sharp and unblinking as he guarded the mouth of the alley. Then the silence shattered. Tires screeched on ice. Voices barked orders, urgent and sharp. Blue and red lights strobed across the brick walls. Flashlights sliced through the dark. Daniel stiffened, instinct telling him to shrink back. For years, uniforms had meant suspicion, not safety. And now, with a child in his arms, what would they see? A rescuer or a suspect? Harper barked once, loud and commanding, his stance unyielding. "Over here," someone shouted. A flashlight beam locked on them. Within seconds, the alley filled with boots, radios, and noise. "Sir, don't move," an officer ordered. Daniel raised one trembling hand. "She's hurt. She needs help." The officers closed in, beams flashing over Daniel's gaunt face, the trembling girl, and the dog bristling at their approach. "Back the dog off," someone barked. Daniel tightened his grip on Harper's collar. He's not your problem. He's the reason she's alive. For a moment, doubt lingered in their eyes. Then one officer gasped, "It's her! It's Mia!" The tension snapped. Radios erupted. Mia found. Alive. Urgency surged. Mia stirred weakly, burying her face deeper in Daniel's chest. Harper pressed against her, anchoring her against the storm of voices and lights. "She's freezing," Daniel said firmly. "Get her warm, now." A sergeant pushed forward, crouching low. Relief flickered across his face. Medics rushed in, but Harper snarled, ears flat, teeth bared. "Call him off," one medic shouted. Daniel's voice softened. "Harper, it's okay. They're here for her." Still, Harper didn't move, until Mia's small hand slipped from the blanket and clutched his fur. Only then did he ease, lowering his head to her side. The medics wrapped her in blankets, checked her pulse, their voices brisk. "Hypothermic, but responsive. She needs transport immediately." Daniel's arms tightened before he let go. As they lifted her, Mia clung to Harper's fur. Her whisper was barely audible. "Don't. Let him go." Daniel's chest clenched. He looked at the officers. "You heard her." "He stays." For the first time in years, their eyes held something different. Not contempt, but awe. One officer murmured, "That's Reyes, isn't it? The ex-cop. Thought he was gone." The sergeant's gaze lingered on Daniel, then flicked to Harper. He gave a short nod. "The dog comes too." Harper trotted at Mia's side as they carried her to the ambulance, refusing to fall back. Flashbulbs erupted at the end of the street. Reporters shouted. Cameras captured the ragged man, the grizzled dog, and the missing girl alive in his arms. For the first time in years, the city saw Daniel. Inside the ambulance, paramedics worked quickly. Daniel hovered at the door, exhaustion pulling at him. Harper stood firm at the step, body taut, eyes locked on Mia. She stirred under the blankets, weak fingers fumbling the oxygen mask aside. Her eyes searched until they found him. "Harper," she whispered. He stepped forward instantly, pressing paws to the ambulance edge. Her arms reached for him. "Don't go." Harper climbed carefully onto the step, pressing close. Mia buried her face in his fur, clinging with all her fragile strength. The alley hushed. Even paramedics froze. The girl who had been lost didn't reach for them. She reached for the dog who had barked until she was found. Daniel's throat closed. He'd seen Harper celebrated before, but this was different. This was survival, raw gratitude, and trust in its purest form. "I heard him," Mia whispered into the dog's neck. "I followed his bark. It brought me back." Her words felt like a prayer. Cameras flashed again, immortalizing the sight. The pale girl, arms locked around a battered shepherd, her anchor to life. When medics tried to separate them, Mia sobbed. "Please, don't take him away. Please." The sergeant's voice softened. "It's all right, Mia. He's not going anywhere. He rides with you." Her crying eased. Harper settled beside her, still sharp-eyed, still guarding. Daniel exhaled, his chest aching. For years, Harper had been his only tether. But tonight, he realized Harper's gift was greater than himself. The dog had always belonged to the broken, the lost. That's why he had found Mia. "Are you coming?" a medic asked Daniel. He hesitated, then shook his head. She's got who she needs. But Mia's hand reached out, trembling toward him. Her whisper cut through everything. "Don't go." Daniel's breath caught. For the first time in years, someone asked him to stay. He climbed inside, settling beside the stretcher. Her hand slipped into his, small but firm. Something shifted in his chest. The forgotten man was seen again, through the eyes of a child. The ambulance pulled away, sirens rising. Inside, there was only quiet. The hum of the engine, Harper's steady breathing, and Mia's faint whisper as she drifted to sleep. I knew if I followed his voice, I'd be safe. Daniel closed his eyes, her hand still in his, Harper at their feet. For the first time in years, the cold didn't feel cruel. Outside, the city had changed too. Reporters swarmed, neighbors gathered at barricades, their eyes turning toward Daniel with something he hadn't felt in years: gratitude. A man from the crowd stepped forward, holding a paper cup of coffee, steam rising into the night. His hand trembled as he offered it. "Here, for you." Daniel hesitated, then accepted. The warmth seeped into his palms. His throat tightened. "Thank you," he whispered. The man's eyes glistened. "No, thank you. For her." Others approached. A scarf pressed into his hands, gloves offered, murmurs of, "Please take it." Small gestures, ordinary, but given with reverence. Daniel stood stunned. Harper pressed against his leg, voices no longer sharp with suspicion, but softened with belonging. The wall of invisibility had cracked. The sergeant approached quietly. "We'll need your statement," he said, then added, "Good work. Both of you." He crouched and extended a hand, not to Daniel, but to Harper. The shepherd sniffed once, then pressed his nose into the man's palm. The sergeant smiled faintly before stepping back. As the ambulance carried Mia into the night, the crowd slowly thinned. Tomorrow, the city would wake to headlines and photographs of a girl wrapped in blankets, arms locked around a dog's neck, a homeless veteran at her side. But in the quiet aftermath, Daniel stood with warmth in his hands, Harper pressed close, and something he had thought lost forever stirred again inside him. Not a medal, not a parade, but something real: respect. By dawn, the city no longer whispered, it shouted. Screens glowed in diners, living rooms, and subway platforms, all carrying the same headline. Breaking overnight, a missing 8-year-old girl, Mia Harper, has been found alive. The unlikely heroes, a homeless veteran and his aging police dog. The footage replayed endlessly. Officers in a narrow alley, paramedics lifting Mia, wrapped in blankets. But one image eclipsed all others. Mia's thin arms locked around the neck of a German shepherd, her lips pressed into his fur, as if he were the only solid thing left in her fragile world. Harper. In the clip, her whisper carried like a ghost. I followed the sound of his bark in my dreams. That line spread faster than the news itself, repeated in headlines, whispered in homes, echoed in classrooms. In a corner diner, patrons leaned over steaming mugs. That poor child. And that man. Look at him, one woman murmured, hand to her mouth. A construction worker shook his head. Doesn't matter if he's homeless. He saved her. Him and that dog. The waitress, eyes on Harper's face on the screen, whispered almost reverently. It's like he knew it was his mission. In living rooms, families pulled children closer. On social media, captions flooded. Heroes come in all forms. Loyalty doesn't fade. The city had a story, and it burned like wildfire. Daniel didn't see the screens at first. He sat in the corner of a shelter. Harper curled at his feet, a cooling cup of coffee in his hands. Around him, the room buzzed, conversations louder than usual. He kept his head low, but he could feel it. The way people glanced at him, not with pity, but recognition. A man slid into the chair across from him, holding a phone. "You've seen this, right?" he asked, tilting the screen. Daniel blinked reluctantly. On the display, a headline glowed: "Homeless veteran and dog save missing child." Beneath it, the photo nearly stopped his breath. Mia clutching Harper's neck, his old partner standing as solid as a pillar. Harper nudged Daniel's knee with his nose, tail tapping once, as if he recognized himself. Daniel's throat tightened. Hours ago, they were invisible. Now, the world calls them heroes. By midday, reporters clustered outside the hospital where Mia recovered. Cameras caught every angle, repeating the line, "She survived thanks to a former police K9 and the man who never left his side." Inside precincts, officers watched the clips. Some whispered about Daniel's fall, his injury, his discharge, his long slide into obscurity. Others shook their heads. Doesn't matter where he ended up. Last night, he was exactly who that girl needed. But Daniel felt none of it. He only felt Harper's head heavy on his lap and the knot tightening in his chest. Later, when he tried to walk near the hospital, the world closed in, reporters swarming, microphones shoved at his face. "Daniel, how did you find her? What was Harper's role? Are you a hero or just lucky?" Daniel froze. Harper pressed close, a low growl warning the crowd back. Cameras flashed, capturing every crease of exhaustion on Daniel's face. That night in the shelter, Daniel whispered into Harper's fur, "They don't know, boy. They don't know some days. You were the only reason I kept breathing. They call us heroes, but we were just trying to survive." Harper leaned harder against him, steady as always. The hospital room glowed with pale morning light. Machines hummed softly beside Mia's bed, but inside the room there was a hush, fragile as glass. She sat propped on pillows, blanket tucked under her chin. Harper curled at her feet like a sentry. Daniel stood back, arms crossed, wishing he could shield her from the crush of attention. Reporters leaned forward gently. "Mia, can you tell us what you remember?" For a long moment, silence held. Then, in a voice as fragile as paper, she whispered, "I saw the dog's eyes, and I knew I was safe." Pens scratched. Cameras clicked. Even hardened reporters blinked against tears. Within the hour, her words spread across every screen in the city. That single sentence became the heartbeat of the story. Parents repeated it like a prayer. Veterans whispered it like the truth. Children scribbled it in uneven handwriting on letters sent to the hospital. I have nightmares too. If I had a dog like Harper, I wouldn't be scared anymore. Daniel tucked one of those letters into his pocket, unable to admit how much it meant. By afternoon, the hospital arranged a press briefing. Doctors wanted to assure the public. Police wanted to highlight the rescue. Reporters wanted more words. But when Mia appeared, holding Harper's leash with both hands, the room fell silent. Cameras lowered instinctively. Her thin shoulders trembled, but her eyes were steady. She looked down at the dog beside her, then back at the crowd. "They kept me in the dark," she whispered. "I was scared all the time. But then I heard barking, and I saw him, and I knew I wasn't going to die." Daniel swallowed hard, vision blurring. The flashes erupted again. but all he could hear was her voice. That night, anchors across the nation echoed her words. Sometimes the eyes of a dog are all it takes to remind us we are not alone. And everywhere, Harper's image appeared, sitting tall beside the girl he had pulled back from the shadows. Back at the shelter, Daniel sat with Harper pressed close, his hand resting in the thick fur at his side. He had spent years believing invisibility was punishment, maybe even safety. Now the light felt relentless, almost unbearable. But then he remembered Mia's arms clinging to Harper, her trembling voice. I saw the dog's eyes, and I knew I was safe. Daniel realized this story wasn't his alone anymore. Through a child's voice, the world had been given something it desperately needed. Proof that even in the darkest alleys, loyalty and love can pull someone back into the light. He whispered into Harper's fur. They're listening now, boy. Not just to us, because of her. Harper's tail swept once, slow and certain, as if he understood. And for the first time in years, Daniel let himself believe it might not be a burden to be seen again. Maybe, just maybe, it was a beginning. At first, the headlines were all praise. Homeless veteran and dog save missing child. The country clung to the story like a lifeline. But hope is fragile, and stories too good to believe soon invite suspicion. By the third day, doubt crept in. It started online. Anonymous voices hissed from behind glowing screens. Convenient, isn't it? A homeless vet suddenly becomes a hero. Bet he staged the whole thing for attention. Unstable people shouldn't be around kids. The words spread like mold in damp corners. They had never seen Daniel's eyes, never felt Harper's steady weight against their side, never watched Mia clutch his fur with trembling fingers. But suspicion thrives louder than truth. Police reopened old files. A dishonorable discharge, overturned years later. Bar fights after nights of whiskey. A trespassing ticket when he sought shelter in an abandoned house. To them, it was a record. To Daniel, it was his life. Stripped of context, turned into ammunition. A detective met him in the hospital lobby. We need to ask some questions, Mr. Reyes. Daniel stiffened. Harper rose instantly, a low growl vibrating in his chest. I'm not hiding anything, Daniel muttered, though his stomach twisted. For years he had survived by staying invisible. Now the light burned too bright. Talk radio fanned the flames. Look, I respect our veterans, one host said, voice slick with false sympathy. But what if this man put the girl in danger just to play hero? You're suggesting he kidnapped her, another replied. I'm saying we don't know. He's unstable, living on the streets with a dog. Not exactly a role model. The words sliced Daniel open. He didn't need strangers to remind him he was broken. He already knew. That night, sitting on the steps of the shelter, Harper pressed against his leg. Daniel remembered Afghanistan. Suspicion in every shadow. Whispers of unstable, compromised. Those words had followed him home. Now they chased him again. Inside the hospital, Mia clung fiercely to Harper. She didn't understand rumors, only the truth. They're wrong, she told a nurse. He saved me. Harper saved me. The nurse squeezed her hand, but said nothing. Silence can wound as much as words. The next morning, a reporter cornered Daniel outside the hospital. Some say you exaggerated your role. How do you respond? Daniel's jaw locked. He wanted to shout that Harper had led him there, that he had carried Mia with arms shaking, that he had wept when he heard her breathe. but the words jammed in his throat. "I don't care what they say," he muttered. "The girl's alive. That's all that matters." The reporter smiled, satisfied. Doubt always sold. That night on his cot, Daniel lay awake, Harper curled against him. He replayed every accusation in his mind, each one tangled with old memories. The firefight where his best friend bled out, the tribunal that questioned his sanity, the long walk out of base with nothing but a duffel bag. The same look was in people's eyes now. "Can we trust you?" Daniel buried his face in Harper's fur. "It never ends, does it, boy?" Harper's breathing was steady, an anchor in the storm. 2 nights later, drizzle clung to the streets outside the shelter. Daniel hunched deeper into his coat. Harper leaned against his leg. "Hey!" A slurred voice cut through the night. A drunk staggered forward, bottle in hand, eyes narrowing. You're that hero, huh? Big damn savior." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The man lurched closer, voice dripping mockery. "Bet it's all fake. Guys like you, always looking for a handout. Pretend to be broken. Pretend to be brave. Pathetic." Harper stiffened, body coiled, a growl rumbling like distant thunder. "Easy, boy," Daniel whispered, though his own heart hammered. The man sneered. "What, gonna let your mutt fight your battles?" He stepped closer, too close. In a flash, Harper moved, stance firm, teeth bared, eyes burning. The drunk faltered, bravado cracking. Onlookers gathered, shelter residents, a couple walking home, even a taxi driver slowing to watch. Daniel's voice cut low, steady. "Leave. Now." The drunk hesitated, then stumbled back, muttering. He disappeared into the alley's shadows. Silence hung. Only the hum of the city remained. Daniel's hand shook as he pressed it against Harper's back. "Good boy." Relief and gratitude bled through the words. A shelter worker stepped forward, an older woman with tired eyes. She held out a cup of steaming coffee. "Here," she said softly. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but respect. Daniel hesitated. Then Harper nudged him. He accepted the cup. The warmth steadied his fingers. "That dog," the woman said, voice thick. "He's not just protecting you. He's reminding us what loyalty looks like." Daniel swallowed hard, unable to reply. Harper sat proud, chest rising steady, gaze still sweeping the street. By morning, the confrontation was everywhere. A bystander had filmed it, the drunk's taunts, Harper's growl, the way he stood like a fortress. The caption read, "Even when the world doubts him, the dog never does." The city split in two. "He's dangerous," some argued, using the dog to intimidate people. "Are you blind?" others countered. "That dog saved a child. Show some respect." At the shelter, church groups delivered bread for the hero and his dog. Across the street, a man shouted that sympathy was wasted on a fraud. One moment, children begged for photos with Harper. The next, strangers crossed the road, clutching their bags. Fame had made Daniel visible, but not safe. Inside the cafeteria, Daniel sat in a corner, Harper at his feet, voices carried too clearly. "Would you let your kids near him?" one muttered. "My son wants to meet the dog," another said softly. Daniel clenched his jaw. His hands shook under the table until Harper pressed his head against Daniel's knee. "You don't care what they say, do you?" Daniel whispered into Harper's fur. "To you, I'm just me. Not broken. Not a headline. Harper's tail thumped once. Enough. That evening, a volunteer lent Daniel a phone. Headlines screamed, "Hero or hazard? Can we trust the man behind the dog?" Comments seared his eyes. "Give Harper a real home. He deserves better. Dogs don't follow bad men." Daniel dropped the phone, chest heaving, vision blurred with unshed tears. "Why can't they just let me live?" he muttered. Harper nudged his arm, eyes steady, unwavering. Daniel clung to that gaze, the only truth unshaken. In the days that followed, the division deepened. A bakery sent bread to the shelter with a note, "For the hero and his dog." Hours later, a man spat at Daniel's feet, hissing fraud. Some neighbors stopped to take photos with Harper. Others avoided him like a disease. Late one night, Daniel sat outside under the buzzing neon of the shelter sign. Rain fell in sheets, pooling around his boots. "They don't know what it's like," he whispered. Harper pressed close. "To come back broken. To be told you're nothing. Now they call me savior or curse. Nothing in between." Harper rested his head on Daniel's lap, silent, steady, his eyes unshaken. Daniel's voice cracked. "As long as I've got you, I can face it, even if the world's divided." The rain pounded harder, but Daniel didn't move. In Harper's presence, he found a fragile shield against the noise, a reminder that loyalty doesn't need headlines, and truth doesn't need permission. The morning sun fell golden across Jefferson Elementary's playground, catching the shimmer of banners strung above the gates. This wasn't about report cards or science fairs. It was a day of gratitude. Daniel lingered near the crowd's edge, Harper steady at his side. The shepherd's ears twitched at the laughter of children and the hum of voices. To onlookers, they looked like they belonged here. But Daniel's chest felt tight. Fame still tasted strange, sweet, bitter, fragile. At the entrance, students waved hand-painted signs. "Thank you, hero," and "Harper, you're the best." Children reached timid hands to pat Harper, while others peeked shyly from behind their parents. The dog accepted it with quiet dignity, tail sweeping once, his presence calm and reassuring. Inside the gymnasium, the air smelled of popcorn and pine. Tables overflowed with baked goods and jars labeled for donations. Veterans from the local American Legion offered handshakes and nods. One man gripped Daniel's hand firmly. "We've got your 6. Daniel's throat tightened, but Harper nudged him, grounding him. Children ran forward with cards, crayon sketches of Harper beside Mia, hearts and stars, scrawled across the paper. A boy no older than 7 pressed a folded paper airplane into Daniel's hand. "So you and Harper can fly away from trouble." Daniel chuckled softly, kneeling. Harper rested his chin on his knee as though he too understood the moment. "I think Harper likes the fan mail," Daniel murmured, scratching his ears. Donations poured in, coins rattling, envelopes stacked, online pledges announced from the stage. A teacher read aloud a letter. "Even small hands can make a difference. Thank you for showing us courage is real." Daniel stayed in the back, watching as people crowded the donation table. It wasn't about headlines. It was about the ripple of one act of loyalty. For the first time in months, his shoulders eased. The principal took the stage. "Today, we honor a man and his dog who reminded us that bravery isn't about medals. Sometimes it's about showing up, standing by someone, and never letting go." Applause thundered through the gym. Harper barked once, soft and low, and Daniel blinked back tears. A children's choir sang a song written for the rescue. Their voices trembled but shone, the lyrics about loyalty and light. When they finished, children surged forward to hug Harper, patting his fur, whispering thanks. Daniel knelt with them, each touch a reminder that scars didn't erase worth. By evening, the fundraiser had exceeded every expectation. Veterans nodded one last time. Volunteers wiped tears. Children waved with drawings clutched in their hands. Daniel walked out into the cool air with Harper, his coat pockets heavy with letters and envelopes. For once, he felt the warmth of belonging. The wind was biting as he crossed the park. Harper's paws crunched against frost, his breath visible in soft clouds. Daniel noticed the faint hitch in his step, the quiet limp he'd tried to ignore. Guilt pressed hard in his chest. At the edge of the path, a woman in a wool coat lifted a hand. "Mr. Reyes?" she asked gently. "I'm Claire Donnelly, Veterans Outreach Alliance." Daniel stiffened. "If this is about another story—" "It's not," Claire said quickly. "We don't do stories. We do solutions. Housing support for veterans with service animals. Your own space. Heat. No conditions." Daniel scoffed. "Nothing's ever free." "You're right," Claire replied. "But this isn't free. You already paid for it. With your service, your scars, and the loyalty you've given that dog. You earned this long before today." Harper shifted, his back leg trembling faintly before he steadied himself. Daniel's chest hollowed. For years, Harper had carried him through storms, and now he limped quietly because Daniel's pride kept them in the cold. Claire crouched slightly, her eyes on Harper. "You've been taking care of him all this time, haven't you? Maybe it's his turn to take care of you." Daniel swallowed hard. Pride warred with desperation. He closed his eyes. "Where?" Claire's voice softened. "A small complex just outside downtown. Quiet. Pet-friendly. Warm." The apartment wasn't glamorous, but when Daniel unlocked the door that night, it felt like another world. The air smelled faintly of paint and cedar polish. The heater hummed softly in the corner, warmth spilling across the modest space. Harper padded cautiously over the hardwood, circling twice before sinking onto the rug with a long sigh. His whole body seemed to release years of vigilance. Daniel stood frozen, hand on the doorknob, almost afraid to let go. For so long, nights meant concrete and cold, never certainty. Here there was silence, safety. The unfamiliarity made his pulse race. He set his pack down and sat heavily on the couch. Springs creaked beneath him, but softness cradled his back. Across the room, Harper stretched fully for the first time in years, tail brushing the rug. Daniel rubbed his scarred hands together, staring at them. They had dug through trash, clutched Harper's collar through despair. Tonight, they rested on his knees, empty. Harper lifted his head, eyes steady and unwavering. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think we made it." In the kitchen, he found a bowl and filled it with water. Harper rose slowly, lapped eagerly, tail brushing Daniel's calf. Daniel crouched to stroke his back. "You deserve more than this," he murmured. "But it's a start." That night, Daniel stretched out on the couch. The heater hummed. Harper's breathing rose and fell from the rug. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't brace for sirens or footsteps. He closed his eyes and didn't open them until morning. Sunlight slanted through the blinds. For a moment, disorientation seized him. The walls, the warmth, didn't match the alleys of his memory. He bolted upright until he saw Harper, sprawled comfortably, tail sweeping the floor in lazy arcs. The dog looked younger, rested. Daniel exhaled. "You're home," he said softly. Not just to Harper, but to himself. In the days that followed, small rituals took root. Coffee in the mornings, its aroma filling the room. Walks that ended not in uncertainty, but in return. Folding a blanket on the couch at night simply because he wanted to. One afternoon, snow drifted lazily outside the window. Harper pressed against Daniel's leg, watching. Daniel rested a hand on his neck. They weren't running anymore. It felt fragile, but it was real. That evening, with Harper curled on the rug and a mug warming his palms, Daniel whispered quietly, "Thank you." He wasn't sure if it was for Claire, for the children, for strangers who had donated, or for Harper, who had never once let go. Maybe it was for all of them. Maybe it was for himself. Harper lifted his head, eyes glimmering in the lamplight, and thumped his tail once. Daniel leaned back, letting the warmth seep all the way through his bones. For the first time in years, he believed the word he had avoided most. Home. Spring in Chicago arrived like a cautious visitor. Snow retreating in patches, streets still scarred by salt and grit. For the first time in years, Daniel walked without feeling invisible. Not everyone nodded, not everyone smiled, but enough did that. It chipped away at the shell he had built around himself. At his side, Harper limped, but proud. His coat brushed clean, a faint silver now threading through the black. The collar around his neck glinted in the sun, the word hero engraved on its plate. That collar had not come from strangers. It came from a child. It was a Saturday morning when a knock rattled Daniel's apartment door. He opened it to find Mia standing there, her hair tied back with a ribbon, her small hands clutching something behind her back. Her foster mother stood a respectful distance away, giving space. "Hi, Daniel," Mia whispered. Then her eyes dropped to Harper. "Hi, boy." Harper's ears perked, and he nudged forward, pressing his muzzle into her chest. She buried her face in his fur without hesitation. It was as if no time had passed between the alley and now. I wanted to give him this." She pulled out the collar. It was simple leather, but the plate shone. The single word hero carved into it seemed heavier than steel. Daniel swallowed hard. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." She slipped it gently around Harper's neck, fastening it with clumsy fingers. When she leaned back, her eyes brimmed with tears. "He saved me. And—" She hesitated, glancing up. "He saved you too." Daniel froze, as if the words had caught him in a spotlight. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound stuck in his throat. Mia wiped her face with her sleeve and stood straighter. "You're both heroes, even if people forget. I won't." Harper pressed his head into her hand, as if sealing a vow. Daniel could only nod. When the door closed behind her, he sat on the floor with Harper, staring at that single word on the collar. Hero. For the first time, he let himself believe it. A week later, Claire from the Veterans Outreach Alliance convinced him to attend a meeting. "Just listen," she said. "No one will force you to talk. Daniel sat in a circle of folding chairs, Harper curled loyally at his boots. Around him, men and women wore the same haunted eyes he saw in the mirror. Some missing limbs, some are missing more. At first, Daniel stayed quiet. He listened to stories of nights broken by phantom explosions, of friends who never came home, of families lost to silence. He thought of leaving. But Harper shifted, resting his head on Daniel's knee. "My turn?" Daniel finally said, surprising himself. He stared at the floor. "I don't have much to offer. Just this." He rested a hand on Harper's neck. "This dog kept me alive when I didn't want to be. He dragged me forward when I couldn't. He reminded me I wasn't gone yet." The room stayed silent. Then one man across the circle nodded slowly. Another murmured, "Yeah, we get it." No applause, no speeches, just recognition. Daniel wasn't alone anymore. When the meeting ended, someone clapped his shoulder. "Bring him back next week. We all need dogs like that." Daniel managed a small smile. "So do I." By April, the ice along the river had melted into slow water. Daniel walked with Harper through the park, the leash loose, his shoulders no longer hunched against invisible blows. Children pointed at Harper's collar. One little boy asked shyly, "Is it true? He's a hero?" Daniel crouched down, running his fingers over the plate. "Yes, kid, he is." The boy grinned and scratched Harper's ears. Harper wagged, proud but gentle. Later, an old man feeding pigeons on a bench called out, "Fine dog you've got." Daniel lifted a hand in thanks. The man squinted at the collar. "Dogs know the truth before people do. Looks like yours carried it until the world caught up." Daniel chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, guess so." He reached down, rubbing Harper's ruff, fingers brushing the word hero. "Guess they finally see what I've known all along," he whispered. Harper leaned into the touch, eyes half closed, as if agreeing. That night, Daniel sat by his apartment window. Harper stretched on the rug. Outside, city lights blinked like far-off stars. For years, he had thought survival was the best he could hope for. But as Harper sighed deeply in his sleep, Daniel realized survival had turned into something more. He wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't just a ghost with a dog. He was Daniel Reyes, a veteran, a man who had carried scars, but also carried loyalty. And beside him, wearing a collar with one word, was the truest partner he had ever known. Hero. Daniel whispered into the quiet room, "We're home, boy." Harper's tail thumped once against the floor, steady and sure, and for the first time in years, Daniel believed it. The community center stood on a weathered corner of the south side, an old brick shell brightened by murals of doves and handprints. Daniel had passed buildings like it for years, never daring to step inside. Now, with Harper's nails clicking on tile, he crossed the threshold. Inside, the smell of coffee and crayons mingled. A woman with curly hair and kind eyes approached. "Daniel Walker." "I'm Marisol, and this must be Harper. The kids can't wait to meet their hero dog." Daniel almost laughed at the word hero, but Harper's calm presence steadied him. In a small classroom, sunlight cut across mismatched chairs where a dozen children gathered. Kids from shelters, veterans' families, students who already knew too much about loss. Their chatter stopped the moment they saw Harper. "That's him," one boy whispered. Daniel knelt, resting a hand on the shepherd's shoulder. This is Harper. He's been through a lot. Just like me. Just like some of you. The room fell silent, listening. Daniel spoke of trust, resilience, and scars carried quietly. He told them Harper wasn't a superhero, just a partner who never gave up, even when the world did. To show what trust looked like, he blindfolded a boy named Luis and asked the class to shout directions. The noise was chaos. Luis stumbled, nearly falling, until Harper padded forward, brushing gently against his side, guiding him across the room. When the blindfold came off, Luis grinned. "He didn't let me fall." "That's trust," Daniel said. "Sometimes the world is noisy, but if you find one steady anchor, you don't have to fear the dark." The children crowded Harper with laughter and hugs, braiding a ribbon into his fur. Watching them, Daniel realized something he hadn't dared to believe. His story wasn't over. It was shifting. After class, a girl named Jasmine lingered. "My dad's a soldier," she whispered. "He doesn't talk. Not ever. Do you think maybe he could come here, like you?" Daniel crouched to meet her eyes. "Sometimes it just takes one person to show it's okay to talk. Maybe that person is you." She hugged Harper and whispered, "Thank you." Daniel knew she meant both of them. That evening, as he left under a sky streaked pink and gold, Daniel laid a hand on Harper's collar. "Hero," he murmured. "Guess that goes for both of us now." It began with a single snapshot. Daniel kneeling in the gym, children encircling Harper, a little girl asleep against the shepherd's chest. A local paper ran it with the headline, "From Sidewalks to Sanctuary, Veteran and Dog Teach Kids Hope." By morning, it was everywhere. Reporters swarmed the center. Cameras followed Daniel home. At first, he wanted to retreat into silence. But Marisol's words echoed. People need to see this. So Daniel spoke. "Harper and I aren't special. We're proof that when someone, anyone, chooses not to give up on you, life can change. Tonight, thousands of veterans sleep on sidewalks. Thousands of dogs sit in cages. Neither should exist in a country that calls itself free." The clip aired that evening and cut straight into living rooms across America. Soon, his words were printed on billboards above highways. Harper's amber eyes with the slogan, "Every hero deserves a home." Posters showed Daniel's scarred hand gripping Harper's collar, the word hero gleaming in silver. Talk shows called. Daniel only agreed if Harper could sit beside him. On live TV, the shepherd became a symbol, calm, loyal, the truest storyteller without words. Letters poured in, from veterans who hadn't spoken to their families in years, from mothers whose sons came back silent from war, from shelters drowning in unwanted dogs. One boy in Kansas taped a photo of his mutt to notebook paper. "When kids laugh at me, I sit by my dog. He doesn't laugh. He makes me feel like I matter. Thanks for telling the world that dogs save people too." Daniel read it aloud at the center. His voice cracked, but no one minded. Soon, adoption drives paired veterans with rescue dogs. Cities launched joint programs. Politicians, rarely agreeing on anything, quoted Daniel's words. Neither should exist in a country that calls itself free. One crisp autumn evening, thousands gathered at the Lincoln Memorial, candles flickering like stars. On the screen behind the podium glowed the photo of Daniel and Harper, beneath the words, "A Nation Inspired." Daniel stepped forward, Harper at his side, collar gleaming under floodlights. He looked out over veterans, families, children, and for the first time, he didn't feel invisible. "When I was lost," he began, "I thought I had nothing left. I believed the world had forgotten me. Then a dog no one wanted chose to sit beside me. He didn't see a homeless man. He saw a partner." He swept a gaze across the sea of faces. This is what tonight is about. Veterans are not invisible. Dogs are not disposable. Together, we carry each other out of the shadows. Behind him, Harper sat tall, amber eyes catching the light. The crowd rose, applause thundering, candles lifting higher. Daniel bent, whispering into Harper's ear, "You saved me." The shepherd pressed closer, steady as ever. Later, back in his apartment, Daniel sat by the window. Outside, Chicago glowed. Alive, no longer cold and distant. On the rug, Harper sighed contentedly, head heavy on Daniel's knee. Daniel's hand rested on the engraved collar. For years he had believed survival was the most he could hope for. Now, he knew better. Harper hadn't just kept him alive. He had led him home. "Hero," Daniel whispered, smiling faintly. "That word's ours now." Harper's tail thumped once, soft but sure, and for the first time, Daniel believed it. For a long while, he didn't speak. He simply looked at the glow of the city, alive and forgiving, and listened to the steady breath of the dog who had given him back everything he thought was gone. A memory flickered. Cold pavement beneath his body, the ache of hunger gnawing at him, the shame of being invisible as strangers passed by without so much as a glance. Then, those amber eyes. Harper had looked at him without judgment, without hesitation. Just presence, just quiet loyalty. Daniel closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. The past no longer clung like chains. It felt like something he could look at without drowning. The wounds were still there. Some scars don't fade, but they had been woven into a larger story now, one not defined by loss, but by survival. "Funny, isn't it?" Daniel whispered, his voice breaking the silence. "We didn't ask for any of this. Not the sidewalks, not the hunger, not the nights where we didn't know if the sun would mean anything at all." Harper's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, though his eyes remained half-closed, content. And yet here we are. Daniel's hand tightened gently on Harper's fur. "We made it, partner." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy at once. Daniel's throat tightened. How many times had he nearly given up? How many times had Harper carried him forward when he had no strength left for himself? He looked down at the dog, the faint graying around Harper's muzzle catching the glow of the lamp. The years had left their marks, subtle but visible. Harper was no longer the stray, dragging himself through alleys. He was a veteran in his own right, his body carrying its own quiet history of survival. "You know," Daniel murmured, voice softer now, "they call us a symbol. They put us on billboards in speeches. But the truth is, it was just you and me, against the dark, against the silence." Harper lifted his head slightly, pressing it more firmly into Daniel's knee, as if to insist that truth didn't need to be spoken. It had been lived. Outside the window, a siren wailed in the distance before fading into the hum of traffic. A group of teenagers walked by below, their laughter rising into the night. Instead of feeling apart from it all, Daniel felt tethered, connected. The city lights no longer seemed harsh. They were warm, softened by memory and perspective. The same streets that had once abandoned him now felt like proof. He had survived them. He thought of the children at the community center, of Mia with her careful hands fitting Harper's collar, engraved hero. He thought of the letters that poured in from strangers across the country, of the boy in Kansas who found comfort in his mutt. Each memory was a thread, weaving into something larger than himself, something enduring. The silence deepened between them, not empty, but full. The way silence feels between old friends who no longer need words. Daniel felt a swell in his chest, not pride exactly, but gratitude so vast it startled him. "I used to think," he said quietly, "that being forgotten was the worst thing that could happen. But maybe it isn't about being remembered by everyone. Maybe it's about being seen by someone. Just once. And you did that for me." Harper gave a soft, contented sigh, his eyes closing completely now, as though affirming Daniel's words. Daniel leaned back against the chair, tilting his head until it rested against the cool glass of the window. The city stretched before him, alive with stories he would never know, but no longer frightening in its enormity. His reflection in the glass no longer looked like a ghost. It looked like a man, tired, scarred, but whole. The hand on Harper's head lingered, fingers brushing through fur worn coarse by years, but still strong beneath. "We made it," he repeated, voice barely above a whisper, "and no one can take that away from us." A single snowflake drifted past the window, glowing briefly in the lamplight before melting into the night. Winter was giving way to spring, slowly but surely. The city would thaw, flowers would break through cracks in sidewalks, and life would continue in its quiet resilience. Daniel felt Harper's breathing deepen, slipping into the easy rhythm of sleep. He stayed still, unwilling to disturb him. For once, Daniel didn't need to plan the next step, didn't need to brace for the next blow. The present was enough. The warmth of Harper's weight, the glow of the city, the simple truth of survival shared between man and dog. This was life. Fragile, imperfect, but undeniably theirs. Long minutes passed before Daniel finally closed his eyes, letting the stillness settle around him. His hand never left Harper's fur. Outside, the city lights continued to glow, not cold, not distant, but like lanterns in the night, reminding him of what he had once forgotten, that even in the darkest places, light has a way of finding its way through. And sitting there by the window, with Harper's head heavy against his knee, Daniel allowed himself the rarest of things, peace. Sometimes the most powerful reminders in life come from the quiet loyalty of a dog. German shepherds, especially, have a way of teaching us what resilience, trust, and unconditional love really mean. They don't ask for recognition, yet they give everything. Their strength, their protection, their heart. Stories like Daniel and Harper's remind us that our bond with animals is not just companionship, it's a lifeline. A dog doesn't see the scars we carry, they see us. And in their eyes, we find a reflection of hope we might have forgotten. If you've ever felt that kind of connection with your own dog, you know how deeply it shapes you. And if you'd like to explore ways to strengthen that bond, there's a resource I've found helpful. I'll leave the link here. Only if you feel like taking a look. At the end of the day, our dogs don't need us to be perfect. They just need us to be present. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful gift they give us in return.